Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome back to the show Dave Voigt, who is a writer and film critic from In the Seats. Dave, welcome back. Always a pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me as always, Rob.
For people who haven't seen in the heat of the night, I'm just going to read a little brief synopsis. A black Philadelphia police detective is mistakenly suspected of a local murder while passing through a racially hostile Mississippi town, and after being cleared is reluctantly asked by the police chief to investigate the case. This cast, of course, we have a great cast. I'll mention some: Sidney Poitier, Rod Steiger, Warren Oates, Lee Grant. It was directed by, of course, Norman Jewison, who just recently passed away. This is a review dedicated to Norman, the great Canadian filmmaker. Do you remember the first time you saw this, Dave?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I was pretty young. And it was shocking. I mean, just sort of I remember that opening scene with just sort of the frank nudity and then just under like I was old enough to understand the implicit racism at the time, and it made it powerful, but at the same time, this is really a weird one for me because as it's aged, I've gotten a greater understanding of what and who Norman Jewison was as a filmmaker. In many ways,
Mm-hmm.
this film has almost been like it's a very good film, but it's almost been sort of overhyped as a quote unquote important film. Really, at the end of the day, what Norman Jewison made a very good living doing was making pulp, sort of B movies, comedies, crime thrillers. Like he did a very good job at it
Mm.
and made a lot of very good movies, but this is one of those ones that hit at such a certain time, and particularly with Sidney and just sort of the level of his performance. I mean, Steiger won the Oscar, but at the same time, I think this is where Sidney Poitier really got noticed by the
Mm.
world.
Mm-hmm. Do you sorry, because you said something interesting. You think it's overhyped. You think the film itself is overhyped? Like, I was curious what if you could expand on that.
To a degree, yes, because I mean, at its core, it's a B movie. It's pulp. It's genre. It's not social commentary. It's a crime movie.
It's interesting. Yeah, it has a thick, it's pretty thick on plot, but I would say that the characterization of the two central characters of course Virgil Tibbs and Police Chief Bill Gillespie are really interesting, and I know that we've seen, now it gets criticized because like so many stories take a similar approach of a racist white person having to work with a black person. Today, I think things like Green Book, they sort of get criticized for the black person being more of a device for the white person to have an arc, and that
Yeah.
he's no longer he's racist, and then by the end he's no longer racist because of having spent so much time with someone black. He then sees this person as an equal. However, here I think it's not that simple. I think they don't quite do that here. I would say it's more complicated than that. I was curious if you thought it was more complicated than that, or your thoughts on that relationship.
Oh no, I agree. I agree. It's really a scenario where they're in the situation where both sides are looking at the other like they're an alien. It's not a racism thing. I don't understand you. I have no means or capability or intelligence, emotional or otherwise, to understand who you are and how you exist.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's where the social commentary and sort of the magic of it, at least for me, particularly in their two performances, comes together because it's about them understanding each other. It's not about Rod Steiger overcoming racism or Sidney Poitier accepting, his fellow law enforcement brethren in the South. It's these two men finding common ground to understand who they are as people.
It's interesting that you touched on it being pulp at the time, not necessarily social commentary. Are you saying that you don't think that that was the intent, that people maybe saw that in it?
I I don't think that was necessarily the intent, but I think given the time, this was one of those perfect storms of a movie. Like it does feel like had this hit 5 years earlier or even 5 years later, it probably would have played very differently. But because it was 1967, right at the peak of those issues, it really kind of hit a very significant sweet spot. Because I mean, let's remember, I mean, this is from writer Sterling Siliphant, who, he wrote The Towering Inferno and Shaft in Africa, fun movies, but hardly anything that is, I would qualify as socially significant, let's say.
Right. Right. Well, I haven't read the book of this. I don't know what the because I know it's adapted from the book. So I'm not really sure if how much that had an impact on any kind of, you know, the racial strife that is explored in the film. It's interesting you say that because to me the film, so much of the film is about racism, particularly the when he gets slapped, Poitier, by the man they're questioning, and he slaps back. Um, and I know Poitier apparently insisted on doing that. You can't they I wonder
Yeah.
what they were thinking. That they must have been like, this is going to be bold, this is going to stir stuff up, during the civil rights movement, everything. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but I mean, certainly people saw it
They
as
knew
social.
it, they knew it had to hit hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
I
mean, and especially, go ahead.
no, go ahead, sorry, I was curious what you were going to say.
No, it just in terms of establishing the character, because I mean, the character of Virgil Tibbs, they're like the author, I'm blanking on his name right now, John Ball, he had done a couple of books with the Virgil Tibbs character. And it definitely felt like it was one of those scenarios where Poitier got a hold of the script and knew that this was a character that could make a significant cultural impact, especially given the time they were in. I
Hmm.
don't think the filmmakers necessarily went into this trying to make a significant, culturally significant film. I think Poitier went into this knowing I can really put a strong black man on the screen in a very uncomfortable way, in an uncomfortable situation
Yeah,
that will be different and remembered in ways that people won't even be able to comprehend right now.
that's it. It's interesting because I hadn't thought of that, and yeah, because it's true because that's Poitier insisted on that scene. So that's the beauty of a collaborative form, is that maybe without him, we would have just got a genre piece. One doesn't know, but you're right because it is a pretty heavy plot, and it feels you know like a real genre plot driven crime film. But the race relation stuff I find really really interesting in the film, and what I like so much about it is that they don't oversimplify anything because like we were saying, I don't feel that Steiger is transformed to no
No, of course,
longer
yeah.
be a racist at the end. I think his racism runs deep from the beginning, and I think at the end maybe he's gone a little more to the shallow end of the pool at most, right? But the thing is, even when he towards the end of the film and they're hanging out at Gillespie's place, and this is one of the scenes where suddenly we're seeing Gillespie open up to him and talk about that he's lonely, that no one ever comes to his house, and then he asks Virgil if he's also lonely, and Virgil says, "No lonelier than you." And it's so interesting that suddenly his that racism just veers its ugly head all of a sudden, where he's like, "Don't pity me, black boy," and all, and it's something along those lines, and it just comes right out of nowhere, and it's almost like it's partly because he doesn't want to be pitied, but partly because I felt Virgil is basically saying, you and I are the same. We feel the same things. No, I don't feel any more lonelier than you do. And to Gillespie, there's no equal here. We're not equals, So those it just shows how this racism is taught. These people are born into it because they're in the small town in
Mhm.
Mississippi, and that their hate is really, I mean, more from Gillespie, his hate is being more challenged as opposed to him being transformed. I don't know if that was your impression as well.
No, and I mean I would agree with that to a certain extent because I mean it definitely comes down to just like you said, this is one of those instances that's taught. And I mean it's not sort of ingrained. It's one of those things where they couldn't like he couldn't comprehend the moment, or it made him scared that moment when Virgil was trying to sort of relate that no, we're the same person.
Yeah, yeah,
That,
exactly.
that's
It's the
that's that's
fear.
that scared his character. That scared him, which is why he
Absolutely.
had that outburst.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that was really interesting. And you even see that earlier, like the famous slap scene we're talking about. Gillespie doesn't do anything and he doesn't know what to do. On the one hand, you got a black person slapping a white man, which the expectation, I suppose, is, arrest this guy or kill him even for slapping a white person. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, he's a police officer. So it's like he doesn't know what to do. But then later on,
And
one of the
the white man did assault the police officer first.
exactly, yeah, exactly. So it just shows that he doesn't know how to react. He's only acting what people expect of him. So it's interesting. It's this racism is taught, but then even if he suddenly has a different perspective on this, he feels he has to keep up with what he knows and what's been ingrained in him. And I thought that was so interesting because even later, one of the character who hears about it says to Gillespie, "Well, the last chief we had would have killed him for that." And he's looking at him suspicious. And Steiger just runs off. Fear, as you said, he's scared. He spits on the ground. He's trying to get Virgil the hell out of town because his views are being challenged and he's reacting in ways where he's suddenly seeing this guy as an equal who's smarter than him, who's more capable than him, who's a normal human being, but he's never had to be an equal with a black person. That to me is one of the most fascinating things about the film.
Well, and it's the fear of asking for help and needing somebody that you don't understand because there is that back and forth pull even from the beginning of no, sir, Mr. Philadelphia Police Chief, I don't think we need your boy to help us. We'll solve it just fine.
Right.
Minutes later, can you help me? Your train is not for 12 hours. I am not an expert.
Yes,
They
exactly.
find him.
Right.
Virgil proves that it's not him. Screw you. I don't need you. It's that back and forth of the uncomfortable nature of the truth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Steiger's character knows the truth. He just doesn't want to admit it or share it with the townspeople or share it with the public at large because that's not what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also because Gillespie does he is also pushed into working with Virgil because Lee Grant's character, who is the wife of the man who was murdered,
Yeah.
she sees that Virgil is smarter here, and everyone else is just willing to blame it on the first suspect. And she's like, keep this guy on it. So he has to do it. And then on the flip side is that the guy who was killed was going to start this factory in town, which was going to bring in a lot of jobs and a lot of money. So that's another reason why this woman now has power over him to pick the people in charge. I mean, so that's another thing. He's not choosing to work with this person. If anything, he wants
Well, and
this guy the hell
it's
out of
also,
there.
but I mean, it's also understanding the definition of justice. And I mean, I think that's one of the big things that Steiger's character was struggling with because it wasn't enough to find someone for the crime. In his mind, it was like, oh, well, we got this guy. He did it. I'm telling you, he did it. This is the
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
But no, it's
Which,
not. It's not Southern justice. It's justice.
yeah. Which I also found so interesting because he does that later when he then thinks it's Sam, his fellow police officer.
Yeah.
And sure, he has a lead. It's suspicious, but he is his arrogance. He is so sure when he gets a lead on something. Maybe that's to hide an insecurity because he's maybe not all that bright, perhaps. But he is so sure of these leads, and then this is part of the conflict with Virgil, because Virgil's always the one, right? Because he's, the head of the homicide, the number one homicide man, as we find out in Philadelphia. Um, not, he proves him wrong. Not only is he proving him wrong, but as a black man proving him wrong. And I think that's also why early on he puts him in prison. He puts Virgil in prison for withholding evidence, so to speak. Um, I found that dynamic. I think that's probably what's lacking from films that try to take a similar approach with a bigot and a white bigot and a black person. Not that I've seen every movie, but I think this film sort of portrays it perhaps in a more sort of realistic, as realistic as perhaps it could possibly go. I don't know if that was your
Well,
impression.
because I mean, this film tried to make it about the people and
Yeah,
not necessarily about the issue.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and the like I said, the dynamics worked, so well. Some of the trivia I found out was pretty interesting, because this city that it takes place in Mississippi is called Sparta, but they actually shot it in Sparta, Illinois, because in the South, um they couldn't shoot it naturally, because Poitier had been threatened in the South not long before by the KKK, him and Harry Belafonte. So he refused to shoot there, and I don't blame him. So they called it Sparta, I guess, because they just to keep up with the street signs and things like that. They just called it Sparta, Mississippi. So I thought that was it. The only part that's actually shot in the South is the cotton fields part, which was in Tennessee, and apparently they had to get out of there so fast because there was already death threats towards Poitier. He had to sleep with a gun under his pillow. But that scene that looked like a documentary to me. I mean, I don't think those were actors or background performers picking the cotton. They probably just asked those people to do it. I mean, just the authenticity, the look on their faces, that must have just got people there. I don't know how you felt about that segment.
Yeah, shooting really down in the South would have been problematic, especially in 1967. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but I mean, it did lend an air of, I mean, I'm looking for the right word here. I don't want to say brutality, but I mean, there was an uncomfortable authenticity
Yeah,
to those moments, which
right.
was obviously by design.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But they managed to find a sense of humor in the film, because yes, these are all bigots, but the cops. There's this interesting dynamic with the cops in Gillespie, how they're all afraid of him, and they're all trying to get to please him. And there's that piece about, well, who did I tell to fix the fence in the police station, and they're blaming each other. Or even early in the film, it's Virgil who figures out that the first suspect, played by Scott Wilson, was left-handed, so he couldn't have been the one to kill this person. And all the cops, Warren Oates is like, oh yeah, we just figured out he's he's left-handed. He couldn't have done it. I thought that felt organic. I don't know how you felt about that, the humor in the film.
Well, I would say most of it comes through from Warren Oates, who, I mean,
Yeah, he's
throughout
great.
his career was such an underrated actor. I mean, especially
I
comedically as
agree.
well. Sort of the sniveling simp, the comic relief, sort of the butt of the joke, the guy they kick in the butt,
Yeah,
the guy on the head walking out the door. Like he played such a diverse sense of parts, but he is so memorable in that part.
absolutely.
And some of the ones in like Wild Bunch and other things, but he really is to me one of the linchpins of this movie because he allows for a little bit of pathos and a little bit of humanity with his humor
Mhm.
in the face of this racism and intolerism and everything else that's kind of going on.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. Another thing, well, they pretty much spell out, why this was going on, but you can't help but ask yourself, why is Virgil helping? Why stick around to help? They've been racist towards him. They've arrested him for no reason. They're pushing him around. They're pretty abusive. They lock him up. Why help these people? Why stay in this town? to help. I was curious if you had any thoughts on why he's doing this.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to sort of that initial impetus of like Rod Steiger not wanting his help, but then later, 5 minutes later, asking for his help. Like I think it was just comes down to the simple reality of, okay, this man extended an olive branch and asked.
Right. And I really like the scene when he's waiting for the train. He's just going to take off. Everyone's being an asshole. And, it's interesting because Steiger has a certain insight there, or perhaps maybe not necessarily an insight, but maybe he gave him a motivation, which was to stay, which was, you could show that you're smarter than all of us, right? And I think that is part of it, was that this was an opportunity to show that the black man who everyone hates and wants to kill is smarter, is more capable, and is able to solve this crime, and no one else can. And I think it was a big fuck you to everybody there. I don't know if he was thinking this, but maybe it's a step in the right direction of change. I don't know if the character was thinking that far ahead, but I thought that was pretty compelling. I don't know what was your thoughts on that?
Not necessarily the idea of the fuck you, but just sort of the, like I said, that olive branch of having the respect to ask.
Mm,
Because I mean, in so many walks of life, in so many different avenues, a lot of times it comes down to the respect of saying, hey, asking. Because a lot of times in life we assume.
mm,
We assume, if you're a white man in the South at that time, you assume that, black men weren't supposed to have that kind of money. They're not supposed to have those kind of smarts. It's
right.
just not what black men do. Boy, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
But for that split second, Steiger overcame all that and said, I need your help.
Right. Right. Well, yeah,
And I mean,
because
as much as there was going to be a certain degree of personal pleasure from Poitier going, fuck you. I
yeah.
know my go away. I think a lot of it goes down to sort of that basic level of human respect of asking.
Mm, mm. Well, Poitier is so great at bringing, not necessarily bringing. I think that's his natural qualities of being so dignified, and his performance. I mean, often, but in here too, is this subtlety and nuance. And yes, when he's being abused and these racial slurs, or even when he's nearly killed by that gang, he never allows himself to sort of explode in rage. It's almost like he knows that they're going to behave this way, and yes, it's going to really piss him off. It's going to infuriate him. So it's sort of that combination of like, yeah, I know they're going to be like this, but I still can't stand it. And you just see how much he is trying to hold it together in this film. I don't know how you feel about his performance here.
It's the struggle of knowing the need to rise above.
Mm,
Going down into the gutter and fighting was not gonna solve anything.
right.
The way he wins, he knew the way to win was to rise above. And he
Exactly.
knew the
Yeah.
way to win was to rise above. And by doing that, he could elevate people around him.
Yeah.
And I mean, from a professional standpoint, you see what Poitier did sort of after this film and going on, and even with the stuff that he directed and how he sort of turned into this great comedic director and really was so much about not necessarily one over the other or proving this or proving that. It was really about rising above and making everything on a level playing field,
Yeah.
which I think especially was in so many of his different roles was kind of what this was all about. And I mean, like for anyone listening, if you have the Apple Plus streaming service, I recommend you check out the documentary on Sidney Poitier because there's some great insight on the shooting of this film, but also some of the work he did leading up to this. I mean, from Defiant Ones to Lilies of the Field to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was the same year as In the Heat of the
Yes.
Night. I mean,
Yes.
those
Yes.
two films are. so opposed to one another. It's really quite fascinating, but it's just amazing to watch too.
Yeah. You know, I wonder how much maybe younger audiences looking at this realize how radical and bold a film like this, or even Guess Who Coming to Dinner was, you know, at the time during the Civil when, you know, race, the tensions were at an all-time high in the late 60s. I wonder if people kind of realize showing a black man slap another white man or being in control here, like this was dangerous to do something
Oh
like
no, I mean,
this,
but I
you
mean, we
know.
can push it further, like To Serve with Love, which was also same year
Yes,
as Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Dinner.
that's a good, really good one too.
Patch of Blue from '65, Slender Thread. I mean,
That's a good one.
there's a lot of really dynamic stuff happening, not just at the time, obviously, but in the cinema of the time it was as well. I mean, Raisin in the Sun, Paris
Oh yeah,
Blues, Lily of the Field.
yeah,
There was something about the work that Poitier did, which was about making the black actor equal, not an add-on, not an extra, but equal, if not superior to some of his counterpoints, and was standing on the basis of his talent. I mean, even when we go back to like 58 with the Defiant Ones, I mean, Tony Curtis really is playing it one dimensional. It's Sidney Poitier is sort of the layers to the film.
yeah.
And I mean, you can say that on about so many other different pieces of work. And it's one of those things that I really think came to a head in uh in the heat of the night, not necessarily intentionally, because I mean, you can never plan how things are going to be received or the scripts that are going to come your way as an actor. Like, there's no way in hell that, you know, as a professional, he could plan to do To Serve with Love in the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's
Right.
Coming to in the same damn year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I'll have to see that documentary. Is that a new documentary?
Yeah, newish. It played TIFF last year, and it's
Oh,
on the
oh, I
Apple
think I heard
Podcast
about this. Yeah.
service.
I'll have to check that out.
It's fantastic. I mean, it really gives a lot of context to not just performances like here in the heat of the night, but also everything that he did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you ever meet Jewison over the years?
Once, very in passing, very, very briefly. It was just a smile and a nod thing at a cocktail event or something. It was never an actual introduction, but
Hmm. I'll have to read. He has a memoir. I'll have to
yeah.
check out his memoir. But so many good movies, and of course he did so much to help young talent. I mean, started the CFC here, I believe. He started it,
Well,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
And I mean,
incredible.
when you really look at his body of work, like I said, there aren't necessarily a lot of deep movies, but there's a lot of really great storytelling.
I agree. Yeah,
I mean, from Cincinnati Kid, The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. The original Thomas Crown Affair is obviously a fun movie. I mean,
yeah,
Fiddler on the Roof is, I mean, obviously a lot of that is Topol, but it's still such a great movie.
yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar kind of redefined the rock musical, something like Rollerball with its sort of near future corporate commentary, and Justice for All.
Oh, I love that.
And I mean, even movies he did in the 80s like Soldier Story and Agnes of God, which had some crime and like thriller elements to them, are still trying to say something. A lot of
Mm,
what Jewison did, be it via a love story or a comedy, was still trying to say something.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I still am, and I saw it as a kid in the theaters. Was The Hurricane with Denzel
Yeah.
Washington, which they also filmed here, and part of the story takes place here. that that is so strong and also explores racism, of course, like this film. That always left a real strong impression on me. But he'll surely be missed. I never met him. I kind of rubbed elbows with him once, at my where I work part time here in Toronto. He came in once, and
Oh,
I
wow.
regret. Yeah, he came right by me, and I regret I didn't say anything. And actually, another someone else who I worked with, it's a concert hall here in Toronto. Someone I worked with says he approached him before and he was a nice guy, and I was like, why didn't I say anything? You know, now what are you gonna? It's too late. But he's always, you're right. He's not necessarily was not necessarily a deep filmmaker, but always had something to say and made so many really good, entertaining films. Just a couple of other things, touching on the supporting cast. I know we talked about Warren Oates, Lee Grant, small part, but wow. I mean, when just the intensity of and the sorrow of finding out her husband died, and then trying to get Steiger to stop being such a arrogant cop and find out who did it. I thought she was really good. How did you feel about her in this?
This really was such an interesting storm of the talent that they got together for this movie because it, it really feels like it shouldn't have worked as well as it did. You know what I mean? And I mean, granted, uh, I mean, I'm going through the chronology of sort of her career, and I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where this kind of landed.
And then,
Yeah, and I mean, she was one of those actresses who, she did a lot of TV.
yeah,
People always saw her everywhere, but I mean, this definitely gave her a chance to sort of step out from maybe what people expected from her. I mean, this is not, this isn't Divorce American style. You know what I mean? This was
right,
something different.
totally, yeah, certainly. And then, of course, we have Scott Wilson, who apparently Poitier was so impressed with him that he called Richard Brooks and recommended him for In Cold Blood, which was just after this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
read that.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I just read that earlier. And the woman who was the woman who gets pregnant. That's a big part of the part of how they crack the case. We don't have to go into all of that because it's something that one should see as opposed to us describing it. I feel, but is Quentin Dean, and she has quite a fiery scene with Steiger in the police station. She wasn't in many productions, but I thought that scene she has was so, with Steiger was just electrifying. How did you feel
And I
about
mean,
her?
that's the other thing about this movie. I mean, there aren't outside of Warren Oates and Lee Grant, there aren't necessarily a lot of other names that people recognize.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when you watch the film, you're gonna have be like, hey, wasn't that person in such and such, or
exactly.
wasn't
Yeah,
such like there's a lot of that, there's a lot of that guy, that woman who like
exactly.
people recognize if they're watching this for the first time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, he utilized every single part so well, and everyone was so distinctive and had a real, not just a walk on or to give a line to get to the next part. I mean, everyone was so distinctive and served the story so well. I felt. What was there anything else you wanted to mention about this film that perhaps we
Well, and I
didn't?
mean, I think your note about the ensemble is actually a really good note. And I mean, it speaks to screenwriter Sterling Silliphant, who, I mean, I can't sit here and say he was a fantastic screenwriter. He did a lot of TV stuff. He did some questionable things, but when you look at the stuff that he did, there was a lot of really good ensemble stuff and a lot of really entertaining stuff. And I mean, again, a lot of this to me goes back to sort of that perfect storm of right material, right place, right time. Because I mean,
Mm,
again, this is at least to me, like I said, at the end of the day, this plays as a B movie. Like this is still pulp. This is still genre. This is not something that people will necessarily sort of have on their upper canon of filmographies to watch. But it's a damn good movie.
mm,
I mean, and when I watch it again, I felt the comparisons of Jewison, almost to someone like Sam Peckinpah, who again was making really good genre stuff, but stuff that was very, very character driven as opposed to sort of maybe issue driven. I mean, a lot of that I think speaks to sort of the era that they were working in as well, especially with sort of American independent cinema and the stuff that was coming out at that time. And then this to me was one of the forerunners kind of that, of the real sort of thick, juicy, character-driven stuff that we got,
Mm,
either from on one end to, the New York stylings of a Cassavetes
yeah.
to the pulpy sort of, action-driven stuff of a Peckinpah working with a James Caan or a Robert Duvall and something like Killer Elite.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those things where even the B movies, even the quote unquote genre movies or action movies, we're still getting really rich and interesting character driven performances. I
Yeah.
mean, and I mean, I hate to use this example, but I think it's an apt one. Like when you look at something like Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the franchise of them all, but the first one was dripping with character work, but it's a cop and it's a revenge movie.
Right.
It's not something that's on the surface. You're gonna look for this really sort of layered character work, but back then, that's where we were getting this rich layered character work
Yeah.
in these sort of gritty crime thrillers.
Mm. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That's really well said. Really, really well said. Um, well, for people, Dave, who want to follow you on your podcast, website, social media, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, I mean, the best place probably would be to come visit us first and foremost over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest in the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, but also uh, our podcast where I sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals and talk about current projects, state of the industry, what they got going on, and so very much more. You can find the site obviously intheseats.ca and our podcast In the Seats with is on all major providers, podcast providers like, Apple, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive all of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So basically just go everywhere. Give us the like, the subscribe, the ring the bell, the whole nine yards. If you want to stay up to date with what we got going on.
Great. Fantastic. And I will leave the links in the description box below for where you can follow Dave on social media and check out his fantastic podcast, In the Seats. So, Dave, thanks so much. This was a blast. And come back again. Let's do it again.
Well, I was glad to be in the seats with you. And as always, we're looking forward to being here again, and we'll have you on soon to talk about something as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also, click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.